Give me the spade. No, give me the fucking spade!
Zombies, guns, and tantalizing oh my, Cemetery Man, 1994, explored. The boundaries between life and death are undefined and are separated by just a thin line. What happens when this line disappears? The Cemetery Man is a fascinating dive into a world where the dead return to life as strange events occur in a cemetery.
With your consent, I'd like to marry Nagy.
This horrible.
Directed by Michele Soavi and starring Rupert Everett, this is the perfect zombie horror flick. The movie lives up to its tagline and has plenty of zombies, action and love in an eerie graveyard setting, with plenty of gothic visuals and an action-packed storyline that includes killing off both the dead and the undead. Cemetery Man is an underrated gem and an exciting descent into the world of the undead.
If you don't want the dead coming back to life, why don't you just kill the living?
Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Nagy, what's up?
Zombie Graveyard, Cemetery Man, 1994. The movie opens with a young man, Francesco Della Morte, inside a shabby little house. As he goes about his routine, he is interrupted by a knock on the door. He opens the door and he shoots the intruder in the head without any restraint. The screen flashes Della Morte, dell'amore as the opening credits roll. The wordplay on Francesco's surname, Della Morte, meaning of death, while dell'amore means of love, only reflects the duality of his life while he tries to balance the two forces. As Della Morte carries the dead body, he calls out for Gnahi. Gnahi is his helper and is intellectually challenged. He does not speak much and only utters the word Gna. As they make their way to a grave, we learn that Della Morte is the watchman of Buffalora Cemetery. Burying the body amidst eerie noises in the background, they turn around to find a zombie-like creature jumping at them out of the dark.
The gun! Forgot the fucking gun!
Acting on impulse, Della Morte bashes the spade into the creature's head as it falls to the ground. It appears that the cemetery is home to strange returners, dead bodies that return to life after being buried. This is also foreshadowed in the carvings on the cemetery gates with the word resurrecturis, meaning for those who will rise again, carved on it. It's just another day, another funeral at the cemetery for Della Morte. However, things take quite a turn when a young lady catches his eye. She shows up the next day too, to put fresh flowers on what seems to be her ex-husband's grave. The unnamed woman appears to be very attached to her dead husband. And as she leaves, Della Morte ends up offending her feelings. Della Morte visits his friend Franco and talks about the undead situation. He wants to approach the mayor, but that would require filing a lot of paperwork. So he settles on just shooting the returners instead. He goes back to the cemetery to find that the girl has returned yet another day. He approaches her and apologizes for the earlier meeting. Trying to make conversation, he invites her to his place, or the cemetery ossuary. The ossuary piques her interests, and they make their way towards it. She explores the sites and eagerly asks him if she can return. He replies that she could, if only he could kiss her once. However, she seems to be mourning her husband's death and cannot lift her veil. Throwing another veil over Francesco, she finally kisses him. Art imitates art, as this scene imitates a painting by René Magritte titled The Lovers. As the unnamed widow goes away, she gets overwhelmed with a sense of guilt. She blames the place, claiming that it forces her to do things she doesn't want to do. As she hysterically tries to leave, strange things start to happen, and creatures try to stop her from going. However, she manages to run away and Della Morte follows her out of the ossuary. As it turns out, the movie was shot in a natural cemetery in Italy. The ossuary is an actual crypt of bones and most of the skeletal structures used in the scenes are real. Della Morte looks around for her and finds her standing with her back towards him. As she turns to look at him, she kisses him again and wishes to sleep with him. As the two make love on her ex-husband's grave, strange blue flames float around them. It appears that the blue flames, or ignis fatuus, are a natural phenomenon that occur in twilight zones. In a strange turn of events, the dead husband awakens in the grave. He seems to have returned and bites his wife. A frantic Della Morte rushes to catch her as she faints and takes her to safety and tries to revive her while Gnahi gets the doctor. Sadly, she seems to have passed away due to the injuries from her ex-husband's bite.
Her husband.
Oh, sure. He came back from the dead, he raped her, and then bit her to death.
The next day, the local doctor shows up and they investigate the cause of her death. Meanwhile, Della Morte leans against her dead body and talks to her in the ossuary. He turns around and expresses that he doesn't wish to see her again as a returner. At that very moment, she wakes up. He assumes that she has quickly turned and shoots her dead. The movie was alternatively also named Mi novia es un zombie. My fiancé is a zombie, for its Spanish release. They join the mayor for lunch the next day, where his teenage daughter Valentina catches Gnahi's eye. He ends up embarrassing himself and throws up on her. Valentina ends up leaving with a boy on his motorcycle. Meanwhile, an ashamed Gnahi walks back to the cemetery. Della Morte chases behind him in his car and then tries to console him. Gnahi seems to have taken the incident to heart and spends the day wallowing in his misery. In a gruesome turn of events, Valentina and the boy end up in a mass road accident and she dies. Even at the funeral, the mayor seems to be worried more about the election than losing his daughter in the road accident. Claudio, the boy who dies with her, seems to have a girlfriend who is determined to find closure. She lingers around his grave and it appears that she is aware of the dead coming back. At night, Della Morte comes across yet another group of returners. The dead seem to be returning sooner than expected, and he rushes to Gnahi. They wonder what more is in store if this goes on, when Claudio's undead body reaches out from the grave. He rises with his bike, and the young girl begs to accompany him. Taking her with him, Claudio rides away. Della Morte and Gnahi look for him and find him eating her body as she begs for help. They meet their ends as Della Morte shoots at Claudio and stops the madness. The movie lingers at the edge of life and death and intertwines in various instances as lovers are reborn as monsters. The following day, a heartbroken Gnahi visits Valentina's grave. He digs in the mud and then tries to kiss her casket. In a jarring sequence, the dead girl opens her eyes. It appears that she has become an undead too. Gnahi smashes her head off her body and places it on the ground. The undead Valentina seems to remember everything and even talks to Gnahi. He takes care of Valentina's head and even makes meals for her. Although gruesome, Gnahi and Valentina create a bubble of reality that makes sense to them. Meanwhile, Della Morte walks around the graveyard and looks for more undead. He comes across the young widow and finds that her lover has returned from the dead. As she attacks him, he realizes that she was not truly dead when he had shot her earlier. Ridden with guilt, he beats himself up over it as he ponders upon his fate now that an undead has bitten him. As he continues his daily activities, a deathly figure looms out of a fire and warns him to stop killing the dead. The vision claims that the deceased belonged to him and that Della Morte can kill the living instead. As the day progresses, we see the dead rise in huge numbers. Della Morte casually shoots them off while sitting on his work chair and chatting away on the phone. He goes out for a drive and ends up shooting 7 of his bullies. Enraged, he goes on a killing spree and finally gets his revenge. Returning home, he gets some rest before an officer comes to investigate last night's incidents. Despite his car being spotted at the crime scene, Della Morte pretends to know nothing of the murders. It would seem that he has finally decided to pay heed to the deathly figure and is now killing the living instead of the dead. Meanwhile, the mayor shows up at the cemetery. He wishes to use pictures of Valentina's grave to gain sympathy votes for the upcoming election. Upon digging the grave open, they discover the headless corpse. The mayor starts hearing Valentina's voice and rushes towards that direction. He finds her head in Gnahi's room and he blames him for Valentina's fate. Valentina wishes to marry Gnahi and her father's refusal angers her. She ends up attacking him and almost kills him. Della Morte appears at the last minute and shoots them both. Yet the mayor returns to life again at night, and he shoots him again. The following day, the new mayor comes around and introduces himself. He brings along his secretary, who appears to have the same face as the young widow that Della Morte had fallen in love with. The secretary visits him at night and faints at the door. As she comes to her senses, she confesses that she feels like she has known Della Morte forever, and they sleep together. The woman expresses that she has a phobia and only wishes to be with an impotent man. Madly in love, Della Morte willingly visits a doctor and asks him to perform surgery on him. The doctor refuses and only gives him an injection that will cause temporary impotence. In the meantime, it so happens that the new mayor sexually assaults the secretary. Having gotten over her phobia, the girl agrees to marry the mayor. She visits Della Morte and tells him that she still wants to keep seeing him. The lady's mysterious appearances are left unexplained, and even her reincarnation seems to have no name. Meanwhile, mad with rage over his lover's marriage, Della Morte drives around once and finally stops at a bar. Yet again, he sees his lover's face in a college girl. He agrees to go away with her and accompanies her to her apartment. After sleeping with her, he learns that she is a prostitute. When she asks him to pay her, Della Morte loses his temper and kills her and her friends by setting the apartment on fire. Even though Della Morte kills people in many instances, they all take place in various ways. The film doesn't lose its grip on the plotline, and the killings are far from being repetitive. The next day, the police officer visits him yet again. This time, he informs Della Morte that Franco has been convicted of the girl's murders, after admitting that after killing his family, he had attempted suicide himself. He learns that his friend has been put in a psychiatric ward and visits him. He accuses Franco of being a thief and stealing his crimes. He shoots Franco's doctor and 2 other nurses in the ward. As Della Morte tries to leave, the police officer interrupts him and warns him of a murderer in the building. Della Morte confesses that it was he who was the murderer, but the officer does not listen.
Carniero! It was me!
As the movie progresses, Della Morte grows more and more reckless with the shootings. He wants credit for the crimes, and he almost wishes to get caught in action. Returning to the graveyard, he decides to leave the place. The deathly figure reappears and warns him that there is no escape. Finally, Della Morte and Gnahi pack the car and drive away. They seem relieved and are happy about escaping when he slams the brakes and Gnahi gets injured. They get out of the car and walk to where the road tapers off, to the edge of a chasm. Gnahi gets seizures and collapses to the ground. Della Morte loads his gun to shoot his friend in the head and relieve him of his suffering. However, Della Morte can't bring himself to shoot him and sits down next to his friend. Gnahi regains his life in the final sequence of the movie, and he throws away the gun. In a dramatic sequence, Gnahi finally speaks and asks Della Morte to take him home. Snow begins to fall, and the 2 men are shown standing inside a snow globe. The screen turns black as the movie ends on a literal cliffhanger. Why should you watch Cemetery Man? Along with some fantastic performances and plenty of gore, Cemetery Man is the perfect zombie horror flick. The chilling atmosphere set in a graveyard, terrifying visuals, gothic themes, and an outstanding background score altogether make it an impressive watch. The visual effects are stunning, and the movie does not shy away from graphic and gore scenes. With a runtime of 104 minutes, the movie is perfectly paced and keeps the audience interested until the end. Along with horror, the protagonist's love life, killing rage, and graveyard misadventures all make up for a total package of utter entertainment. If you enjoy classic horror films, Cemetery Man or Della Morte dell'Amore is perfect for your next movie night. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.
You can't. I'm the mayor.